All right, let's talk about New World. So last weekend, Amazon held an open beta for New World Aeternum, which beyond bringing the game to consoles, will include a few new content, feature, and systems updates. I played over the handful of days the beta was available, reaching the max level of 30, and in the process taking a look at some of the available new content. And guess what? It's New World. There have definitely been a few changes to the game since I played it last, which was during its initial release in late 2021. The presentation and structure of the opening hours and leveling is different, and there are certainly some new things that I hadn't seen before, but even with those differences, it is very much the New World I remember, both the good and the bad. Now, I actually had a fun time playing the game again with friends. The open beta, it's hilarious to call it that, by the way, since the game's been out for 3 years, but yes, playing the New World open beta, it reminded me of what I liked about the game in the first place. I like the combat, I enjoy the exploration. I think the world is quite immersive, like spending time walking around the environments, checking out the different biomes, doing quests, gathering and crafting, and then getting into PvP fights every now and then. That is all a good time. I liked it 3 years ago. I liked it again when I played this past weekend, but also I can already see how it's all going to end. There is a clear shelf life to this experience, and I'm not so sure that Aeternum is doing enough to change that. There is fun to be had, and I am actually looking forward to it, but I'm also not expecting much after the first week or so. I'm sort of treating the launch of New World Aeternum as a bit of like a sending off party, at least for me. It's like my one last hurrah with the game and a trip down memory lane, you know, memories from 3 years ago. And yeah, we're going to be getting fresh start servers. If the beta is any indication, they should be fairly packed with people, at least for those first few days or that first week or so. We'll all be leveling up together with a whole new demographic joining in from the console player base, and that will be fun, but is this going to be a new beginning for New World? I don't know. I mean, I think really truthfully that is largely going to depend on how much the console players enjoy the game, if they stick around past the first month, and if Amazon keeps supporting and improving New World into 2025 and beyond. And those are some pretty big ifs. Okay, so today what I want to do is talk about New World Aeternum specifically. I want to cover what is new and different in this update, along with what isn't. And I'll also go over a bit of my beta experience, discuss my thoughts on the current state of the game, the rebranding, the upcoming re-release, if we want to call it that, and then lastly, my expectations for New World's future. All right, so let's just dive right in, starting with what is actually new in New World Aeternum. Well, for one, the intro experience got a total overhaul. So beyond picking how your character looks at the start, you now actually start off by selecting an archetype as well. Now, this archetype will determine your starting weapons, although you aren't limited to these. It's just what you're gonna start with. You can swap freely whenever you find new weapons in the future. The more important thing, though, is that the archetype you select determines what 3 trade skills you're gonna have boosted to level 50, and this really provides quite a nice head start on leveling up those skills. Then after character creation, you'll be playing through an entirely new tutorial. It still teaches you all those same fundamentals about the game, combat, and movement systems, but you'll be moving through new areas and getting some new story and cutscenes along the way. It is just a tutorial though. We're not going to oversell this. It lasts like a grand total of 5 minutes. Far from the most important thing. Also, I didn't particularly have any issues with the tutorial part, the tutorialization, and the introduction to New World the last time I played it. But yes, they've done some overhauls, and there's a new onboarding experience for new players. Okay, the next new thing is the zone of Cutlass Keys. That's an old thing, you're correct, but it's been overhauled. They have changed it, updated it, and now it is an endgame zone, up level to max, and it includes some new areas as well as new content for us to discover. So one of the big things though is the fact that half of the zone is now fully open world PvP. So once you actually walk past a certain threshold, there's like a barrier that you're gonna see on the map and in game as you're walking towards it. You go past this and then you get a notification that you have entered the PvP area and will be auto flagged for combat after a few seconds. From there, and it is full on, no holds barred, free for all PvP. Your faction doesn't matter and grouping doesn't matter. This is completely 100% free for all, every man for themselves. Now, of course, this doesn't prevent people from going into this free for all area, being flagged and able to damage each other, but not doing so and still people working together, that sort of teaming will for sure happen, and that is something that Amazon is going to have to address at some point in the future, because that will without question happen. Yeah, sure, you can't go in groups, you can't be on the same faction, your guild doesn't matter, but people will go in, 10 people who know each other, and they'll just agree to not attack each other and attack everyone else. Those are going to be situations that, yes, Amazon will have to deal with, because rather unfair and pulls from the whole spirit of this open, free-for-all, no grouping PvP zone. Now, why would you go there in the first place? Well, the PvP zone, for one, is loaded with higher level and higher quantities of resources. Basically, this is going to be like one of the better places to harvest a lot of materials for crafting very quickly. The catch, however, is that after gathering resources, you actually have to safely leave the zone alive in order to use them, because if you die, it means you drop everything that you farmed. Essentially, they have added a mini extraction game into New World, which I think is actually pretty cool. Now then, beyond that, if you engage in any of the free-for-all PvP, fighting other players within the Cutlass Keys open PvP area, you will be rewarded this special new currency, doubloons, that you can then trade in for some endgame gear and other stuff. Also in Cutlass Keys is a brand new endgame activity, a 10-person raid. So there are going to be 3 bosses in this raid. That sounds really small, but 3 bosses, and they say this is going to offer true progression and will be very, very hard, with each boss being more difficult than the last one, requiring coordination and teamwork from a group of up to 10 players. Quite a bit surprising to me that introducing this new 10-person raid, it is going to be only 3 bosses, but I will not judge it until I try it for myself. This raid, by the way, will be dropping the highest item level gear in the game, this in conjunction with the PvP. As far as we know right now, is going to be how you get the best gear in the game once this update goes live. And there is one more sort of a minor new endgame activity in repeatable soul trials. So soul trials are these boss fights that you periodically come across as you're playing through the main story quest and leveling up. Well, they have now added these max level upscaled endgame versions of these fights. What we're not sure of is if they actually have any new mechanics with these endgame variations, or if it's just their damage and health being scaled up. Either way, you're going to be able to do 3 endgame soul trials per day, and presumably they're going to give you some worthwhile currency or resources to make you want to do this in the first place. Now, playing through the beta, I saw 2 soul trials myself, and they were fine, pretty basic fights, although they were the first 2 ones. They weren't terribly difficult in terms of mechanics. My hope here is that the endgame variants do in fact come with changes rather than just, again, the bumped up difficulty via the damage and health scaling. Now, there are some other improvements and additions coming in Aeternum. They've done some updates and improvements to combat. I've always felt that the combat felt good, so barely noticeable because I liked it back then, and I liked it again most recently trying this. They have finally added swimming to the game. There are going to be some new items, weapons, and artifacts. They've added this new cinematic camera for when you're engaging in quest dialogue. They've made some movement improvements. This was actually one of the first things I noticed, even just in the tutorial when jumping in this weekend. Movement feels a whole lot better than I remember. It seems like they've made it snappier and just more responsive. I think actually they might have toned back the startup animations so that you get going quicker and have less of a buildup before reaching maximum movement speed. So yes, it was no surprise. That was my initial thought when just like getting my hands on the beta. And then when I learned they have in fact done a lot of work apparently to player movement as well as world navigation. To quote here, they say players can now run in all directions, vault over objects, and engage in smooth action-oriented movement. Jumping mechanics have been refined for better control. I also felt that the jumping felt better, so again, not surprised to hear this, and this should help with things like jumping puzzles, which quite a bit of them, even just in the beta period from levels 1 to 30, there were many instances where we came across jumping puzzles that you had to engage with, and yeah, the jumping felt better, movement felt better. I was actually quite impressed with this. They've also really emphasized the fact that they've done a lot of work into making performance improvements. I noticed this as well. It seems like the game runs better from what I recall. They say that they've done optimization for higher player density and trying to make the game faster. Even just getting into the game is supposed to be quicker. They've also gone ahead and done some visual upgrades like 4K and HDR support. It does feel as well to me like they've done some sort of a visual pass because everything feels a bit more, I would say, saturated or especially vibrant. The colors seem to pop a lot more than I remember. It feels like they've done just a general visual overhaul with this Aeternum update. There was always a bit of color to it this game, but it seems to pop quite a bit more than I recall. So yes, performance improvements and a visual overhaul, or at least some tuning from what I can tell. And then also worth noting, one of the big pushes, major part of the reason this whole Aeternum thing is happening is because they are now finally bringing the game to console. So there's going to be a console release. With that, there's going to be full crossplay support, so anyone on the PC, Xbox, and PlayStation versions of the game can all play together. Console players will have the option to play on any of the existing servers that are currently live for the PC version. However, with the launch of Aeternum, they're also going to be releasing a bunch of new fresh start servers, and unless you've got friends that are already established and have been playing New World and you want to join them on their current servers, this will be the way to go. Even as someone revisiting the game, I'm not intending to play my old character. Experience of going through a fresh server and checking out all these new updates and leveling with everyone else, that's what I'm looking for. That's what I'm actually interested in. I probably wouldn't come back and play the game if I was just playing my old character, to be honest with you. Oh, and I should mention as well, beyond having cross-platform play, they've also added into the game cross-world arenas and matchmaking, which is a big improvement, especially if you happen to be on a server that was dwindling or dying. Now, one big thing here with this console move and the game having full controller support is that they've also added full-on target locking to the game. So this is going to be similar to a lot of action games. Think like Soul-style games where you lock onto a target, you have them your camera straight focused on them, center of mass, and you will constantly track them wherever they move until you disable being locked on. Now, this has been hotly debated since the beta test last weekend, with people discussing its fairness, i.e. seems a tad overpowered, particularly in the PvP. People don't really care if you have target locking in PvE, but in the PvP, it seems like it's causing some issues. Now, frankly, it seems pretty darn good in almost every circumstance. Obviously, there are situations where you still want to aim for the headshots, but beyond that, the fact that you can guarantee hits at close and medium range for any of the ranged weapons and never lose tracking when you're in melee range as well, that's a pretty big deal. Now, again, it is only ever body shots. It means you can't get headshot damage while you're doing that, but never missing is not a bad trade-off. And then this isn't an either-or situation. You can go for the headshots when you think you can hit them, and then you can just target lock in every other circumstance and pretty much guaranteed to hit everything, but only pretty much, because you do have to keep in mind that projectiles aren't guaranteed hits because they don't track after they've been fired. That's not how it works. So it means that people in close to medium range could still dodge your projectiles, but especially in medium to far range, it's not very hard to dodge your projectiles. And I say that from experience of shooting a ranged weapon at people who were medium or long distance away, playing with my bow, and then also dodging from the other end of that equation. So yes, when you fire a projectile as you're targeted on, it doesn't track them after the projectile starts moving. So anybody can dodge, especially at those further ranges. Like if I target lock and fire a bow shot at someone who is 30, 50 meters away, all they really have to do is slightly move left or right, and they're gonna avoid that projectile because it doesn't lead shots. If they're running left or right, it doesn't shoot in front of them like you need to do when you're firing projectiles yourself, and the arrow doesn't keep tracking them as they move after it's been fired. Nevertheless though, like I said, for many weapons in many circumstances, it is pretty darn good, especially at medium to close range. Things like a close range blunderbuss shot that never misses, sure, headshots would be better, but never missing every single shot ain't too bad either, unless you're incredibly skilled and you can just do that on your own. Also, never missing melee hits when players are jumping, bouncing all around you in melee range. The fact that you can guarantee hit everything if you just keep them locked on, that's also really good. So we're gonna have to see once Aeternum eventually launches if they make any tweaks or changes or just remove locking onto players in PvP, because that has been a hot button topic over the course of this whole past week. So that's the basic overview of the new stuff coming with Aeternum. Now, frankly, this is a nice little update. It's not substantial in terms of the amount of new content, but there's some new stuff here and they've made improvements like we've discussed. I think really one of the bigger hurdles that Amazon is gonna have here is how they're offering this update, its branding, how they've marketed it, and then the price point as well. And let me explain. So if you're a console player, this is pretty straightforward. The game has never been available before on your platform, so if you want to try it on the console, it's simple. You make a single purchase of New World Aeternum, and it gives you access to everything, all the content and features in the game right now for PC players, as well as everything that we just overviewed that's being added when Aeternum launches on October 15th. You're going to have access to all of that. If you're a PC player though, it might be a little more complicated. So all all of the base game that you bought when you first played New World. Like if you bought New World when it first launched, that is all there, along with these changes and updates coming to Aeternum within the confines of the areas that you played and had access to back in the day. However, there is a whole chunk of content you won't have access to if you didn't buy the Angry Earth update. Angry Earth launched last year, and there's a bunch of stuff that came with that that isn't in your base purchase. So as a PC player, if you're hearing about Aeternum and you're like, hey, I want to come back and check it out, you got to remember there will be stuff you won't have access to unless you purchase Angry Earth. That stuff includes access to the mount system, which now unlocks at level 20, access to the new level cap, access to the higher item level gear, and then also access to several different zones and dungeons that are also Angry Earth specific. Now, cost-wise, this is all a wash. It's all the same. The base version of New World Aeternum launching on Xbox and PlayStation, that costs $60 US, whereas the base version of New World on PC, plus purchasing the Angry Earth DLC, that bundle also costs $60. And I think what about this that could specifically be a hurdle for Amazon is convincing those PC players who might have tried the game at launch, stopped playing for whatever reason, and then are now hearing about Aeternum, convincing them to fork over another $30 to have access to everything if they've already felt burnt the first time around. That could be an issue. And it's not about fairness or anything, because again, price-wise, it's all the same. It's more about, can they entice players who stopped playing to come back and spend another $30 to access everything? Of course, the simple answer here can just be, hey, you can come back if you see Aeternum and you're interested in trying New World again, you can come back, play as much as you can until you reach those bottlenecks of not having access through the Angry Earth update. Once you reach those bottlenecks of content and after you spend some time, you could decide then if you want to spend the additional $30. I think the one big thing though that is going to probably upset some people is that while you're leveling at level 20, everyone else who has Angry Earth or who bought the console version is going to be running around on their mounts, and unless you also buy Angry Earth, you won't have access to the mount. Frankly, if I were to give advice to Amazon, I would say I think they should remove the mounts from being locked behind the DLC and put that just in the base game for everybody, to put everyone on even footing up until the end game. I think that would be the smartest thing. I would delay that purchase decision until they've had a chance to experience and decided, hey, am I liking this or not? I think that alone, you're going to get people shutting it off. I think you're going to have people who played New World when it first came out. They hear about Aeternum, they're like, fine, I'll give New World another shot. Why not? They jump in, they spend a couple hours. It doesn't take very long. They get to level 20. A bunch of people all around them, probably most people all around them, have mounts, and they're like, how do I get my mount? I have to buy this DLC to get them out? No, thank you. If you delayed that purchase decision until after they're invested and after they've played a bunch and they've gotten close to Endgame, and then in order to get into Endgame, they have to spend $30, I think that would be an easier pill to swallow for a lot of people. That's just my general advice. Speaking of Endgame, let's talk about it. This has been one of the major pain points brought up time and time again with New World. Mainly, the complaint has been that the endgame isn't quite as fleshed out as players would like. So similar to most every MMO, endgame in New World is all about finding ways to power up and take on harder content. So you want to get the better armor, gems, and weapons that make you stronger and let you take on the endgame PvE and more easily take on other players in PvP. So chest runs are still a thing where people will run around running trains through these zones, opening chests to get access to high-level gear and resources and all of that stuff, killing some mobs along the way. Then there are the mutated dungeons. There are 3 more difficulties beyond running the regular dungeon variations, and these rotate out every week and can be in any of the 12 dungeons with a bunch of modifiers on them. And there are 12 dungeons in the game now, whereas the game launched with 6, so they've doubled that there. There's also the boss arenas. There's the whole crafting, farming, and trading progression for endgame gear. There's the seasonal events and trials that they do. And then there's the PvP, with the 3 modes being arenas, outposts, rush, and wars, that all offer access to endgame loot to some degree by the caches that are provided at the end of matches or by going through the PvP track progression. So all of this has been New World's endgame up until now. And then with the launch of Aeternum, as we've covered, they're adding that new 10-person raid as well as the open world PvP and Cutlass Keys, where you take those doubloons and turn it into gear. So there are a couple of new endgame activities, but is what is here going to be enough? Now, like I said at the top, playing the beta this weekend reminded me what I liked about New World in the first place. The game just feels really good to spend time in. It's fun to explore, it's super immersive, going through these zones and these different biomes. I really enjoy just hanging out in New World's world. Combat I also really like. It generally feels impactful. I think it's a pretty well put together action combat system. It is clunky in some places, but overall, fighting things in PvE and PvP, I enjoy. There's lots of farming and crafting progression to engage with. This is great, especially for solo players. It's a really well put together system. The dungeons have some interesting fights and mechanics to them, and as mentioned, there are now 12 of them, up from the 6 that came at launch. I think the sound design in this game, the sound effects, the chopping down trees, the harvesting ore, the sounds of attacks and spells, the music, just the audio in this game I think is really good. And it seems, just generally speaking, that even the people who are most critical about New World and say that, hey, even though it's not the forever MMO we wanted it to be, you can definitely still get 100+ solid hours of entertainment. And it's true that these core elements in New World are good, and it's what I enjoy. It is why I played a couple hundred hours of the game at release. And that fact, combined with the updates that I've missed since it launched 3 years ago, at this point, it does feel for me that there's gonna be enough for me to enjoy one more playthrough. The beta reminded me that I liked the core foundation, and there is a bunch of stuff beyond that that I've yet to see, so I am actually looking forward to giving the game another go. It's just that my long-term expectations are pretty near zero. From everything that I've heard and seen, it seems like they've done little to address one of New World's biggest problems, and that being that there's no real endgame hook to promote longer-term engagement. Not enough content at max level to keep the dedicated players busy after a few weeks. Now, in working on Aeternum and the console launch, it seems like they abandoned their plans over the past year, releasing little content since their last update in October 2023, which seemingly is what has led to the decreased player count on PC, with the game now sitting at roughly 3,000 average peak concurrent daily players, all of which is to say there are a lot of eggs in the New World Aeternum basket. So my expectation at this point is that if the game ends up being a smash hit on consoles, if they get a lot of traction amongst the Xbox and PlayStation users, then I would expect they'll continue to release content updates in the coming year into 2025. However, if not, and if the PC player base doesn't get a bump either, well, then we shouldn't expect much else from the game going forward. By all accounts, Amazon is all hands on deck for the in-development Lord of the Rings MMO, and depending on how this launch of Aeternum goes, at that point, they're probably going to be deciding how many people stay working on New World versus moving on to their other projects. You know, the discourse around this game always seems to get a tad heated, and I think one of the main reasons is because it's a game with a lot of potential. The combat, the world exploration, the immersive environment, there's a lot to like about New World. It just seems to all fall flat and peter out sooner than people would prefer. And frankly, it's a tad bewildering to me that they've done so many overhauls to this intro and leveling experience, because I never felt like that was even really the problem. I always thought the intro and leveling was fine. In fact, the leveling and exploration parts of New World was primarily the thing that I enjoyed about the game. Like, sure, it did turn into a bit of a drag around release, like halfway through leveling, at those times where you would reach points where you were level gated from continuing the main story quest, and then you ran out of side quests to do. So at that point, you were just like farming town missions over and over, or going out and killing NPCs or gathering resources. But that was an easy enough fix just by like making adjustments to XP rewards from the various activities. They didn't need to like keep redoing the whole intro, starting areas, and leveling experience several times. The big problem has always been the end game. You would have fun playing, you would enjoy leveling up, and then you would hit max level, and after not too long, you'd get to the point where there just wasn't enough content. There wasn't enough variety to keep you engaging and coming back week after week. Now, we will know way more about New World's future very, very soon, as the Aeternum update will be launching about 1 month from now, and I will likely be doing some sort of a follow-up video. At the very least, like I said, I'm happy to give the game one last hurrah. I will play Aeternum. It's going to be just like any new MMO launch, with this overhaul and the fresh servers and a bunch of people playing all at the same time, especially if I can convince some of my mates to join me. That'll be a fun time. Will it be 1 week? Will it be 2 weeks? If I get that out of it, I think that'll be pretty good. And like I said, I think it's long-term success. If it has any chance in the future, it's going to largely hinge on that console player base. How much do they like the game? How long do they stick around? How many people buy it? That will lead to Amazon deciding, my guess, if they continue to support it much further into the future. We'll be finding out in the not too distant future. But that's it for today. Thank you all as always. Hope you enjoyed. Until next time, see you later.